Unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Consumer Reports asking EPW to pursue a clean fuel standard to decarbonize the nation's transportation sector. With that, I'm going to slip out and go over to the Finance Committee and introduce Danny Werfel, and I'm going to yield to Senator Capito to preside in my absence. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Spear, I talked in my opening statements about the prices of diesel and how they've been at a record high in June of 2022. Can you talk about the impacts of when these prices are way up like they are and have been for a sustained period of time? What impact that has on your industry and how it impacts the small businesses, many of them small businesses, some quite large, across the country?
It's significant, Senator. Fuel costs are our second highest cost, just under labor. Under that, you've got safety, including training. It's a lot of important operational expenditures, but fuel is our second highest cost, and that was before we went to 40-year highs on inflation. It should come as no surprise with this standard in California and Oregon. We have litigated it directly because of the cost impact that it has on our industry, particularly those that are running 20 trucks or less or owner-operators, one truck.
Are you in the middle of that litigation right now?
We are indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so
indeed.
Would you say then that these regulations, as I said in my opening statement, are leading to higher prices in those particular states?
Yeah, we were dealing nationally with 40-year highs on inflation. These two states compounded that problem, which is why you see fuel costs exceeding $7 in California, nearly $6.50 in Oregon. That's much, much higher than the national average, as you said. But if you're a small carrier, an owner-operator, you don't have the luxury of a fuel contract. You're paying retail at the pump. So you're absorbing that cost into your operational expenses. So it's chipping away. You're going to see consolidation in our industry as a result, and it's going to hurt the very small businesses that this committee says it supports.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Graff, I think that Appalachian Hydrogen Hub sounds really good to me. And thank you for what you're doing to lend your expertise, and I know we're in competition with a lot of good ones, as you mentioned, but I appreciate you mentioning that. Let me ask you a question. I think this is an important question when we're all looking at what the environmental impacts can be. You mentioned, Mr. Cooper mentioned life cycle. So in order to get to an EV, in order to get to a hydrogen car, there's a lot that goes before you actually are at the tailpipe, I guess is how they say it, measuring before the tailpipe. So a life cycle. Have you done an analysis of that, of what it takes to create the hydrogens and that goes into these vehicles, and how the emissions? I guess I'm focusing more on emissions than cost, although we know that does drive up the cost if you have to do another process before another process. What are your thoughts on that, on a life cycle analysis?
Thanks for the question, Ranking Member Capito. Clearly, we need to look at every aspect of basically well-to-wheel, so to speak, in the approach for any pathway to produce energy, and understand its emissions potential and how we address that. In terms of hydrogen, we have been in the business of producing and transporting and utilizing hydrogen for over 60 years. And we have the full capabilities to make sure that hydrogen itself is well managed, it's well contained, and its fugitive emissions, as you consider its impact on the environment, are genuinely more second order. I think we look at safety, we look at what we can do to make sure that there is the safe transport, the safe production, the safe use of hydrogen. But any fugitive emission of hydrogen into the atmosphere has a much lower effect than other hydrocarbons or other substances that may end up in the environment.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, on the ethanol, obviously there is an expenditure of a great deal of energy to make ethanol. How would you answer that question on life cycle, both emissions and cost?
Yeah, we fully support a well-to-wheels, full life cycle approach when analyzing the carbon intensity of all fuel pathways. And we agree that in particular, when you talk about electric vehicles, we often hear them referred to as zero emissions vehicles. Well, that's ignoring all of the upstream emissions associated with electricity production. But for corn ethanol specifically, the Department of Energy analyzes in great detail that full life cycle, energy use and emissions involved with farming and harvesting the corn and processing that corn into ethanol. When you add all of that together, corn ethanol has an emissions footprint that is about 50% lower than gasoline. So that does include all the farm inputs and all the energy used on the farm all the way through the process to the retail gas station, about 50%.
Let me ask Mr. Graff a quick question, too. Does California have, like, personal vehicles that are hydrogen? That doesn't exist right now, does it? In any large measure?
Ranking Member Capito, there are currently 15,000 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles that have been sold into the California market. I mentioned earlier that we had built the first ever liquid hydrogen production facility to provide renewable hydrogen into the state. And that was specific in working with the automotive companies to facilitate the introduction of those vehicles.
What's the cost of a hydrogen vehicle?
I can't speak to the exact cost today. I think that depending on the model and the make, you're in the $50,000 to $60,000 range today.
And they're quite heavy as well, correct?
And no, they're quite light, actually.
They are?
They're much lighter than, for example, a battery-powered electric vehicle.
Right. Well, the electric vehicles are a lot heavier than the vehicles we have.
Their weight would be comparable to the weight you have in other vehicles today.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Merkley. Senator Fetterman? Senator Stabenow?